Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into Henry VIII, power, paranoia, and the ultimate historic irony. Look, we all know the name, right? Usually when we picture King Henry VIII, we just see this massive guy holding a turkey leg, defined totally by his endless cycle of marriages. And sure, few English monarchs changed their country as drastically as he did, but today, we're not just going to look at him as some static king on a throne. We're looking at his reign as a dramatic case study in human flaws, deep-seated fear, and literally monumental unintended consequences. This is the story of a guy who reshaped a whole nation while struggling desperately to control his own fragile future.
Okay, let's dive into this. I am almost positive you've heard this exact phrase before. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. It's that classic, remarkably concise little rhyme covering his 6 wives, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Honestly, this sticky little playground jingle has probably done more to cement Henry's marital history in our pop culture memory than volumes of thick academic textbooks. It boils down decades of crazy political turmoil, religious upheaval, and the complex lives of 6 distinct women into a catchy tune. And, it immediately paints this picture of a massive, terrifying king just cycling through marriages with this ruthless, almost mechanical efficiency.
But here's the thing. That terrifying pop culture myth, it is completely at odds with the shocking reality of how his story actually began. We remember the large, intimidating tyrant, but if we rewind to 1509, when he first took the throne, the reality is something else entirely. Young Henry was literally regarded as one of the finest, most vibrant princes in all of Europe. We're talking highly athletic, super intelligent, charismatic, and handsome. He didn't just sit around ruling. He was out there excelling at jousting, wrestling, and tennis. He spoke multiple languages fluently. He danced. He composed music, some of which we actually still have today. Foreign ambassadors were literally writing home about his physical strength, noting that his calves were the finest they'd ever seen. I mean, England hadn't seen such a golden young king for generations. He had this absolute, unshakable confidence of a true Renaissance prince, totally determined to leave a glorious mark on history.
Now, to really understand Henry, you absolutely have to understand the Wars of the Roses. This was the ultra-violent civil conflict that came right before the relatively new Tudor dynasty. For decades, rival factions of English nobles had just slaughtered each other over the crown, completely devastating the country. So the Tudor family's hold on power, which was won on the battlefield by Henry's dad, was incredibly fragile. And this right here is the key. Henry lived in absolute paralyzing terror that without a legitimate, undeniable male heir, England would plunge right back into that bloody civil war. This wasn't some mild political headache for him. The trauma was fresh. This deep-seated fear of a contested throne basically hijacked his mind and drove every single major decision he ever made.
So the crucial point of this entire story really comes down to a single number, 1. Just 1. That single digit represents the source of his ultimate panic. See, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, produced only 1 surviving child over their many years of marriage, and it was a daughter, Princess Mary. They had gone through multiple tragic miscarriages and stillbirths, and as the years ticked by, Henry looked at this reality and became utterly convinced his marriage had failed. And not just politically. He genuinely started to believe it had failed spiritually, like he was convinced God was actively punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. He needed a strong son to secure his dynasty and stop a civil war. That intense, overwhelming pressure to produce a male heir literally became the single driving force of his existence.
And that panic leads us right back to our rhyme. But let's look at it now as a frantic, chaotic timeline of a guy going to extreme lengths. Step 1. Catherine of Aragon, a marriage annulled after 2.5 decades. Step 2. Anne Boleyn, beheaded on highly controversial charges when she didn't deliver a son. Step 3. Jane Seymour, who tragically died just days after finally giving him that male heir he craved. Step 4. Anne of Cleves, a quick political match, swiftly divorced. Step 5. Catherine Howard, beheaded while she was still a teenager. And Step 6. Catherine Parr, who navigated his highly dangerous final years and actually survived. Guys, this wasn't just a string of bad breakups. This was a terrified king systematically tearing up the fundamental rules of society, religion, and human decency, all driven by that foundational fear of an empty throne.
And the consequences of that panic? Absolutely enormous. His absolute stubborn determination to secure a son eventually led directly to his break with Rome and the creation of the Church of England. This is literally one of the most defining events in all of English history.
Monasteries across the entire country were systematically dissolved. Centuries of institutional wealth were just confiscated by the crown. Libraries were destroyed, and the social safety net that the monks provided basically vanished overnight. Religious authority was forcefully yanked away from the Pope and handed right to the English crown. So England begins this massive, fundamental transformation that completely isolates it from Catholic Europe and shapes the nation's trajectory for centuries to come, all of it stemming from one man's frantic need for an heir. Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is that everything hinges on that middle date, 1536. We start back in 1509 with the coronation of that golden athletic prince we talked about. We end in 1547 with his death. But 1536, that is the devastating turning point. Henry, fully armored, suffered a horrific jousting accident where his massive armored horse actually fell directly on top of him. He was out cold for 2 agonizing hours. Many at court literally thought the king was dead. This terrifying event is widely believed to have caused a serious brain injury, and it definitely contributed to a sharp, permanent decline in his health. This is the exact moment the energetic, dancing Renaissance prince starts to fade away, and the dark, brooding caricature we all know today begins to take over.
That single event just completely accelerated a tragic physical and psychological rot. After the accident, the reality was brutal. He became increasingly immobile, suffering from these terribly painful leg ulcers that constantly oozed and just never properly healed. Denied the intense physical exercise he was used to, severe obesity set in. To put that into perspective, his waistline eventually expanded to a staggering 54 inches. He needed custom-made armor just to fit his frame. And as his physical agony got worse, so did his paranoia and his explosive temper. That famous charm we talked about, completely replaced by cold ruthlessness. Brilliant friends and incredibly loyal advisors like Thomas Cromwell could suddenly fall from grace in an instant and lose their heads. By the end, Henry was a completely different man. Yet even through all the pain and the paranoia, his central goal stayed absolutely rigid. The Tudor succession must survive.
So what does this all mean? Which brings us to the ultimate question of this explainer. After all of it, after the paralyzing fear of civil war, the 6 broken marriages, the stunning executions of lifelong friends and queens, ripping apart the national religion and drastically shifting global power, did his desperate plan to secure a male heir actually work? Did he finally get the lasting, stable dynasty that he sacrificed quite literally everything for? Well, here is the profound, almost unbelievable historical irony. Yes, he finally got the son he longed for so desperately, Edward VI. But his reign? It was a mere blip. Edward ruled for only a very short time after Henry died in 1547, and he tragically died young at just 15 years old. The golden male heir was, in the grand scheme of history, just a brief footnote. After the highly turbulent and heavily contested reign of Henry's first daughter, Mary, the throne eventually passed to his other daughter, Elizabeth I. This was the very possibility Henry had once regarded with absolute dread and uncertainty. The daughter he totally sidelined, the daughter whose own mother he sent to the executioner's block, ended up holding the crown.
And Elizabeth didn't just hold the crown. She absolutely defined it. She became one of England's greatest and longest reigning monarchs. Under her rule, England experienced this remarkable stability, immense cultural brilliance, and booming national confidence. Her economy flourished, and her explorers began navigating the globe. In 1588, her forces defeated the mighty Spanish Armada, transforming her into this enduring symbol of English resilience and fierce independence. The Elizabethan age inspired the era of Shakespeare and marked the very beginning of England's emergence as a major, undeniable world power. The long-term stability and success that Henry was so convinced only a man could provide, it was ultimately delivered by a woman.
It's honestly a masterclass in how the desperate need for absolute control almost always backfires. Henry VIII's life remains this fascinating story, not just about royal power and ambition, but about deep-seated human fear and unavoidable mortality. He literally tore his kingdom apart to orchestrate this one specific future, only to have fate completely rewrite his plans. In the end, it wasn't his long-awaited son who secured the Tudor legacy, but the daughter he never fully expected to define it. His reign stands tall in the history books as an absolute monument to unintended consequences.
So, I'll leave you with this to think about. When we look back at this incredibly dramatic era of history, does the legendary Tudor legacy truly belong to Henry, the king who burned down his own world trying desperately to control the future? Or does it ultimately belong to Elizabeth, the daughter he completely overlooked who actually achieved the greatness he chased? It's a fascinating question about history, the illusion of power, and what truly makes a legacy. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer,